It was a mild afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind where the sun's warmth seemed to balance the cool breeze just right. On Melrose Avenue, a quiet cafe served as a sanctuary for those seeking a peaceful moment, a break from the bustling streets of the city. Among the patrons sat a man whose face, even behind sunglasses, was immediately recognizable: Clint Eastwood. His years in Hollywood had made him an icon, but now, in his older age, the sharp edges of his features had softened, though his presence remained commanding. He was the kind of man whose silence spoke louder than most people's words. He took a slow sip of his coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. It reminded him of all the mornings he had spent on movie sets, the long hours, the scripts he had memorized, the characters he had become. But now, he preferred the quiet. No cameras, no scripts, just the rhythmic hum of life moving around him. Across the street, unnoticed by most, stood Kevin, a man whose circumstances couldn't have been more different from Clint's. Kevin's worn clothes and unkempt hair told the story of a life lived on the margins. His days had been reduced to surviving behind a convenience store dumpster, his stomach empty for 2 days, serving as an unwelcome reminder of his plight. Kevin clutched a small cardboard sign in one hand, his other hand fidgeting nervously in his pocket. Desperation was eroding his pride. His eyes scanned the cafe, searching for a kind face, someone who might spare $1 or two. He had learned that people were more likely to give when they weren't in a hurry, when they weren't being watched. But in a world where time was money, generosity was often fleeting. When his gaze landed on Clint, a flicker of recognition passed through him. At first, he hesitated. What would a man like Clint Eastwood care about someone like him? But hunger has a way of silencing doubt. Taking a deep breath, Kevin crossed the street. Each step felt heavier than the last. As he approached Clint's table, his voice was barely audible as he asked, "Sir, can you spare $1?" Clint removed his sunglasses slowly and looked up, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, and Kevin felt a wave of regret washing over him. He was ready to apologize and walk away when Clint finally spoke. $1, huh?" Clint's voice was calm, his tone neutral. Then, with a faint smile, he gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down. Let's talk." Kevin froze, unsure if he'd heard correctly. This wasn't the response he'd expected. People usually handed him loose change or ignored him altogether. But this felt like something else. After a moment of hesitation, Kevin murmured a quiet, "Thank you," and eased into the chair, placing his sign carefully on the table. Kevin avoided Clint's gaze, unsure what to say. He felt exposed under Clint's steady gaze, which wasn't harsh or judgmental, but rather curious, as if Clint were trying to unravel the story behind the layers of dirt and despair. "I'm sorry if I'm bothering you," Kevin stammered, his voice raw. I don't like asking. It's just, I'm trying to find work, but it's been hard. Harder than I thought." Clint didn't interrupt. He simply listened, which was more than most people had done in years. Kevin's words began to spill out, as though a dam had broken. "I used to be a contractor, had a crew, steady work. Then the recession hit, and everything dried up. Savings ran out. Then came the eviction notices. After that, well, you can guess the rest." Kevin tried to laugh, but it came out bitter and hollow. "I spent my life building homes for other people," Kevin added, his voice tinged with irony. "And now I can't even keep a roof over my own head." Clint leaned back in his chair, his eyes softening. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly. "Kevin," the man replied, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. "Kevin," Clint repeated thoughtfully, as if turning the name over in his mind. You know, I've played a lot of characters in my life. Cowboys, soldiers, detectives. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that everyone has a story. What's yours? And more importantly, what's the next chapter? Kevin blinked, unsure how to respond. The next chapter? He echoed. I don't know. I guess I just want to make it through the day. That's not a chapter, Clint said firmly, though his tone wasn't unkind. That's a sentence. You need a chapter. Something to build on. Kevin's frustration bubbled up. He wanted to ask Clint what he knew about struggle, but he held his tongue. Something about Clint's presence made it hard to stay angry. Clint reached into his pocket, and Kevin braced himself for a dollar bill and a polite dismissal. But instead, Clint pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. Go here, he said, his voice steady. It's a shelter run by a buddy of mine. They'll help you get cleaned up, find a job, maybe even a place to stay. But the first step is yours to take. Kevin stared at the card, his hands trembling. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice cracking. Clint's gaze didn't waver. Because someone did it for me once, and I wouldn't be here if they hadn't. Kevin left the cafe with the card in hand, unsure if he could trust the hope it represented. That night, though, he made the decision to show up at the shelter. The first step was the hardest. The staff treated him with kindness, helping him secure a temporary job at a warehouse. Over time, Kevin saved enough money to rent a small apartment. Months later, Kevin wrote Clint a letter. In it, he shared how that moment of kindness had changed his life. He didn't expect a response, but writing the letter felt like closure, a way to acknowledge the man who had given him a second chance. For Clint, the letter was a reminder of the power of compassion. He folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, where he kept other keepsakes from his life. Meanwhile, Kevin's story didn't end there. Inspired by his journey, he began volunteering at the shelter, sharing his story with others. His resilience became a source of hope for many, proving that one small act of kindness could ripple outward, transforming not just one life, but entire communities. And for those who walked past the cafe on Melrose Avenue, it remained an ordinary spot. But for Clint and Kevin, it would always be the place where a simple act of humanity sparked a profound transformation. Kevin had not only found stability, but a purpose. He started working with struggling individuals, offering them the same encouragement Clint had given him. He often visited the cafe, sometimes sitting at the same table where his life had begun to turn around. And Clint, always sharp, always aware, would nod at him from a distance, recognizing in him something far greater than mere survival. Resilience, strength, and a story worth telling.